Well, welcome to How to Give Your Federal Buyer What They Want at Fiscal Year End. I'm Judy Bratt, CEO of Summit Insight, and this is a special program that Summit Insight is bringing to you as we approach the end of the federal fiscal year. It's always a special time, and life changes for our federal buyers all year long and becomes especially intense as September 30th comes toward us. And so let's get to it. In the federal fourth quarter slam, Q4 slam, your mission is to set one specific federal goal and use tactics that are designed to achieve it so that in just 4 weeks, you're on track to win the business you deserve and leave your competitors behind. We're in our fourth week of the Q4 slam right now, and so we're really concentrating on what kinds of conversations we're having with our federal buyers and our partners. And so September 30th is looming ever closer day by day. And the objective of this session is to really give you an idea of what's happening for federal buyers, talking to somebody who has been there right behind the desk. So we're going to cover trends and factors that are at play at fiscal year end. We'll talk about what's happening for contracting officers right now. What are the big 3 mistakes that contractors make at this time of year and how you can avoid them? What does it take for somebody to want to return your calls? What kinds of things do federal buyers purchase easily at fiscal year end? When do certifications make a difference and when don't they? And how can you drive more business by September 30th? That's where we're going. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest and my friend, Emily Harman. Emily Harman brings 38 years of service to our country as a naval officer and a civilian federal employee. Emily retired as a member of the Senior Executive Service in May of 2019, and her last assignment was as director of the Department of the Navy's Office of Small Business Programs, where she served as chief advisor to the Secretary of the Navy on all small business matters. Emily finds deep satisfaction in helping others achieve their goals and realize their potential. And she continues to serve through her business, Emily Harman Coaching and Consulting, LLC, as a personal life coach, small business consultant, founder of the Onward podcast, and also now the Onward Movement. You can find out more about Emily on her podcast and also the Facebook group Onward Movement. And I encourage you to get to know her as you listen to what she has to say here and beyond. So Emily, hi, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Judy. Thank you for having me.
So fiscal year end in 2017, fiscal year end the last 25% of time represented 38% of when the federal dollars were spent. What are some of the things that make that happen, and what are some of the big things that are the trends that are driving the way money gets spent at the end of the government's fiscal year?
Well, what tends to happen is the federal government does try to spend their money throughout the year. In fact, March is a big time of year that they watch. You know, that's a time of year that they look to make sure that we're trying to hit our budget benchmarks. They really don't like to have things wait till the end of the fiscal year. What tends to wait till the end of the fiscal year, though, is a lot of the smaller items, smaller contracts, the low-hanging fruit that you mentioned earlier. And it's when people realize maybe a particular contract they wanted to award fell through, or maybe another office wasn't able to spend their money, so they transfer it to a different office and now they can buy something that's on their wish list. So that's kind of what happens at the end of the fiscal year. So you've got to be on your toes and watch out for new requirements coming out.
Well, new requirements coming out is one thing, but talk about the idea of a wish list. That's been a big trend for discussion with a lot of our experts and a lot of our savvy contractors. What's a wish list?
Well, I remember when I was in the Department of Navy Office of Small Business Program, we had a budget and we always wanted to buy more than we could afford, more than what was in our budget. But what we would do is we'd have a list of things that we would spend our money on if more money became available, and we would justify what the return on investment would be for that, how we would spend our money. And if you're really prepared to spend your money, like have a contract vehicle identified, have a requirement that's really justified that people think, yes, you need that. When another organization might not have enough money, or might not have spent all of their money and they're not going to be able to, you might be able to get like the windfall, what's left, and you've got to be ready to spend it. So if you can show you're ready to spend it, you're in a good position. And that's kind of your wish list, what you wish you could buy if you had a little bit more money.
Now, here's a sensitive question. When you're making a list of what you wish you could buy if you had a little money, do people ever have in mind who they'd really like to have them help provide products and services to make their wishes come true?
Yes, because at the end of the fiscal year, you really need to be able to get the money on contract quickly. So that's when you look for, ways you can buy that are within the regs. Like it's really easy to get to an 8A company. If the contract value is under a certain dollar limit. That dollar limit kind of changes every year, but you can just, select 3 8A companies that you know about, interview all 3 of them about the job, about the opportunity, and then pick one. You don't even have to, do an RFP and get a written proposal in place. I mean, those are, there's some quick ways. You could also go sole source to a hub zone if there's only one hub zone small business that could deliver that requirement. So that's why it's important to do the market research. And it's important for industry to reach out before the 4th quarter. So that, right.
So the conversation somebody has in even November and January and March can still be the foundation for a wish list that's coming in from out of the fog.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Suddenly it's ready to rock and roll. So those conversations at times of the year when it looks like nobody's buying can still be lining up. And you mentioned 8As as a group, but a contracting officer could also have 3 veteran-owned businesses or 3 women-owned businesses, 3 small businesses of any flavor.
You could.
In mind.
You could. It's just that with the 8A, there's a special way of you can just call those 3 companies in and talk to them, interview them, and then pick one if it's under a certain dollar value. And you can't necessarily do that with some of the other categories of companies, but it's good for a small business to understand how the government can get to them. So if you're a hub zone, you should know what the federal acquisition regulations say about how the government can get to a hub zone company. Same with service disabled veteran owned. And so you've got to understand those regulations as well, not just the government, because sometimes you're having to educate your government customer on how they can get to you.
And education is a really sensitive thing, because I don't think I would ever find any seasoned contractor who would feel that it was to their advantage to sit down and tell a contracting officer how to do their job. But having a conversation early to say, hey, how do things work in your shop?
Right.
And let somebody explain how things work. And if there's areas where maybe they're uncertain or need to look something up, you're giving them space and grace to get some details and get back to you, rather than making them feel uncomfortable, because there's nothing you want to do to make your buyer feel uncomfortable.
No, that's true.
You're trying to do things by the rules.
You got to approach it tactfully. A lot of times too, it seems that the smaller buys are done by more junior people. So sometimes they may not understand that, the government's had a lot of turnover. There's a lot of, new contracting officers, so they may not know all the regulations that apply to particular situations. So, it's okay. It just depends on, it's a matter of how you approach it. You don't want to be talking down to them. Right.
Right. Exactly right. Now, all of these things, because the federal government fiscal year end is September 30th, what is special? What happens on September 30th that drives this huge deadline? What is special about September 30th, Emily?
What happens is that the government has certain kinds of money. And typically operations and maintenance money is 1 year money. So you have to have it obligated by a certain time. And usually that's the end of the fiscal year. The money goes, there's different regulations that, it can get complicated, but typically a lot of the money has to be spent by the end of the fiscal year, and the end of the government's fiscal year is 30 September.
Right. Now, spent and obligated, is this different from the work performed? That sounds a little complicated. So long as the contract is awarded by September 30th, do you have some period of time to actually do the work? Or are we really in the weeds here and it really depends contract by contract?
I think it depends. I mean, if you're buying a service and it's non-severable service and you award something like 20 September, you could have the delivery come later into the next fiscal year, but it's typically a comptroller and a contracting officer decision, and sometimes commands have different policies on that. So understanding the command that you want to do business with, the organization that you want to do business with, and what their interpretation of the fiscal rules are, fiscal laws, can drive that. So
right, and in there are some programs where there's where an amount of money has been allocated and going to get spent across a fiscal year, but a lot of the time, if you don't spend it by September 30th, that money goes away.
Yes.
I completely get it. So that's why it's such a big deal, and that's in a fiscal year that is relatively normal. Now things are anything but normal. And so I want to pause for a second and ask, what are you seeing in hearing that is unique about the current pandemic situation and how that's driving and shifting and affecting how government buyers are behaving and how they're spending and what they need and what's happening?
Well, I think that also depends on the organization that you're doing business with. But I know I can speak for the Navy. I've been kind of watching the Navy because that's where I used to work. And they are ahead on spending their money from where, obligating their money is the same as spending it, putting it on the contract. They're ahead from where they were at this time last fiscal year, which is surprising, I think, to me and to them, because people are teleworking, working from home. And I don't think that we really thought that the Navy really thought that they could be this effective with everybody teleworking, but it's working out pretty well. And so, but I still think there's going to be, of course, end of fiscal year spend. It's not that that's gone away, but they're doing pretty well. And they're holding more online outreach sessions, which is good because it's making the information available more than just the people that can attend an in-person conference. So I think that's good too. It's leveling the playing field.
And I'm also hearing from contractors who are finding that their buyers are actually, in part, maybe because they are at home, some folks who are actually reaching out and making phone calls are finding more of their calls are getting returned.
That's awesome.
As well, which is really interesting. The other thing that's happening is there are many commands and federal agencies, both in federal civilian and DoD, that have an extra layer of pandemic responsibilities and also then an extra layer of money that needs to get spent. And so those are conversations worth having. Those things might not have been in the forecasts that were published back last fall.
You're right.
It's another reason to take an extra look at the most current online versions of the forecasts in your target agencies, and then circle back and follow up on all the information that's there, the points of contact that are listed, as well as the points of contact in the small business office to see what else is coming that suddenly is a requirement that's being defined as the fiscal year end starts to come to a close.
Right. I mean, if you looked at the forecast last year at this time, I doubt PPE, personal protective equipment, masks and all that wouldn't have been on the forecast. So you're exactly right. Money's going to be spent in different ways. So it's good to keep in touch with your customer and understand that.
And everything related to things related to temperature sensors, things related to buildings and facilities, things related to cleaning and disinfectant, all kinds of things related to things people don't even know about, how what the procedures are going to be to get people into buildings, let people safely work as offices open up. Those are all things to keep in mind and conversations to have with your federal buyers, again, long before September 1st rolls around. So,
oh, yes, definitely.
so these are great times to have conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So put us behind the contracting officer's desk, that what it feels like to be in the chair as the beginning of July rolls around. What's happening for a contracting officer right now at this time of year?
Well, they're having a lot of customers come to them with requirements that they hadn't really planned on, possibly because budgets had changed and one office maybe couldn't spend their money and another office is getting that money and they are wanting to buy something off of their wish list. So there's a lot of last minute things coming into the contracting officer's desk in addition to the current workload that they had. And they're stressed, overworked. And I mentioned earlier before that some of them are inexperienced just because they are new to the job. And I can imagine with COVID now that they're new to the job and maybe some of them haven't really even been in the office. They could have been hired back in March when the virus hit. So they're definitely under a lot of pressure to award contracts. And then they have the typical everyday life stresses. And now this year, it's even more of those stresses that we all know about, you know, working from home, no end in the day from no end in sight because your office is in your home. You know, it's hard to kind of get away. They're all doing their best. They're people, actually. And sometimes we tend to forget to look at contracting officers as people just like us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. And there's a lot of pressure to award work competitively.
Yes.
While vendors are often really excited and optimistic about how it might be possible to win something through a sole source. Sole source contracts represent a tremendous amount of work and risk for buyers. And so to set yourself up in a way that makes it easy for someone to choose you, but also to do so competitively helps a whole lot. If you're able to give somebody a lift by actually even providing research you may have done into other folks that you know you could compete strongly against, but that you could still show up as superior and the one that they know best as the low risk choice.
Yes, definitely. You know, we're spending taxpayers' money and taxpayers work hard for that money and they're looking for contracting officers to get a competitive price, get a fair price. And later on, you know, a lot of the contracts are audited and someone is always going back and double checking to see if you got the best price or you followed all the regs. So contracting officers are under a lot of pressure for that. And I call them competimates. It's good. Like if you're a service disabled veteran owned small business and you want to try to restrict a competition to just among service disabled veteran owned small businesses, you know that the contracting officer is going to have to meet that rule of 2. There needs to be at least 2 or more. And they like to see more because that's more competition, service disabled veteran owned small businesses that can do this work. So it's good to know who you compete against, which companies, and have them come in too and say, look, there's 3 of us that can compete for this. And then, you know, try to get it set aside as a service disabled veteran owned competition or women owned or hub zone, depending on what category that you're in. But they would much rather do a competitive procurement than sole source. Yes.
One of my clients it had been talking to other former federal contracting officers and pulled together a chart of here are about a dozen different competitors who are all providing services in our part of the arena, and here's everybody who does this thing and that thing and this thing. They did a little check mark chart and gave an at a glance assessment or snapshot of players in the competitive space. And so that is an example of a kind of market research that takes a lot of time. They made sure that in the same way as if you are doing a traditional white paper, They didn't have their company logo on it. They didn't have any author's name in the document properties. It was literally a authorless piece of paper or electronic document, but they were able to share that with the contracting shop and save time for folks who have to document what kind of market research they did on their way to competition.
Right. Whatever you can do to help out
Mm-hmm.
is helpful to the contracting officer.
Yeah. So what are some of the other things that can make a contracting officer's life easier as fiscal year end comes close?
If you have a contracting vehicle, like if you're on a vehicle that was already competed, for example, in the Navy Seaport E, or depending on where your what command you're targeting, some of them already have or use existing contract vehicles, so they're not going to probably go and award a brand new contract to try a competitive contract that they already have, like an IDIQ contract that fits within the scope of what you're selling. So GSA Oasis is another one that a lot of companies are on and organizations use. So it's really good to understand how your contracting officers buy at your agency and to get on those vehicles. That makes it a lot easier for them to get to you.
Mm-hmm. This is one of the reasons why I get so excited about the value and the power of doing research into past federal contract award data. That's public information. So as a vendor, you have every reason to show up smart, to have done that research into beta.sam.gov contract data domain, and understand before you're approaching your federal buyers what the data shows about what contract vehicles that they use, as well as which vendors they're actually doing a lot of work with. There are literally thousands of companies that hold a Seaport E contract. Far fewer are the ones that are actually actively being awarded work through those.
Well, that's definitely a way to make yourself stand out, because most companies don't do that research in SAM, and so they don't really understand, how the agency's buying. They're just trying to sell what they sell, and they haven't done that homework. And it makes you stand out if you're a company that has done that homework.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So there were 3 major mistakes that you had seen in your time in being in the Navy and in talking to contracting officers there. And one of the top mistakes that you said that people would do, they would just send blanket emails across everybody in government. Explain what that means and why that causes problems. Because all the vendor is thinking is, let's hit a button and tell everybody we have a thing.
Well, for example, I can just say when I was the director of small business for the Department of the Navy, I would get these emails and sometimes they'd be blind copied to a bunch of people, but I didn't know, so I couldn't tell who was on the email list. Or sometimes they went to a bunch of people, but it would say, hey, I'm trying to, just say I'm a 8A women-owned small business. I'm trying to sell this product. Where should I go, kind of thing. And if you really looked at the email, if you could see who else they sent it to, some cases they sent it to every single person in my office. So and then every single small business professional in the Department of the Navy. And there's 10 different buying commands and they all buy different things. So clearly that company was just had not done their homework and was just sending out a spam email. And then let's just say I didn't catch that it went to a bunch of people. So I did what I could to try to help that company. And then so did Sam in my office, and so did Jill in my office. You're wasting everybody's time. And then we kind of communicate. It was like, oh, I responded to that. So did I. And that's not efficient. We don't have time. Government employees don't have time for that. So you really should target and write it to an individual person about a specific opportunity.
Mm-hmm. In other words, to not, at any time that a business, small or large, sends out a generic communication, you're actually taking away resources from everybody.
Yes. And a lot of times I would just put them in they might even go in spam and I might not even see them. And sometimes I just wouldn't take action on them, because it's like, if you're not going to, I'm going to pay more attention. It's just human nature to the companies that are writing and have clearly done their homework. When they've done their homework, it makes you want to help them out more. And I mean, a government employee, the job of a government employee is to help everybody out. But realistically, there's only so much time in a day. So you tend, it's just human nature to want to try to help people that are helping themselves.
So particularly to have a really specific requirement, then you're putting it right in the subject line about this particular thing at this location. And the more specific you can be, the greater your odds of even getting your email opened.
Yes, the subject line is key. A lot of people don't put anything in the subject line, or it's just generic and you don't even know what it's about. Be really specific. Seek is following up on this opportunity at this organization or something like that. Yes.
Got it. Got it. Basically, if you don't have the time to learn about your buyer sure as heck doesn't have time to learn about you.
Yeah.
All right. Talk about desperation and what that means and what you've seen as a big and common mistake.
A common mistake is just making it clear that you just are desperate to win a contract and only focused on the kind of company you are. I can't tell you how many companies would tell me, hey, stop me in the hall if I was at a conference. Emily, we're a women-owned small business. The Navy's not meeting their women-owned goals. We want to do business with you. I don't even know what they sell. So you've got to lead with your company's qualifications and how you can help the government solve a problem. And the fact that you're a hub zone or a women-owned or a small business or whatever your certification is, that's something to add at the end. But when you lead with that, it comes across as you're looking for a handout because of your company's size and socioeconomic status. And you're not considering the fact that the government has requirements and we need to get them met. And we have problems that need to be solved, and you're not coming across as to how you can solve the problem. You're just coming across as you want a contract based on the Navy or the government needing to meet a goal. And they are just goals. The main function of the government is to main function that we're trying to do when the government awards contracts is to get a problem solved or get a product delivered.
And to deliver the mission. I remember the slides that you presented when I met you, and the Navy's goals included lethality, right? The ability to go deliver the mission and protect the troops and protect America. And awarding lots of contract to small business wasn't even on the slide.
No, because if we can do it with small businesses, that's even better. But we've got to accomplish our mission. And I say it's been a little over a year since I retired, but I'm talking about the Navy.
You feel we forever.
I know.
So
I guess you do.
I completely get that. So to instead of coming across as, hey, I need this award, it's not up to the government to keep your company in business. Focus instead then on the mission, the buyer, the thing that buyer is facing right now, the thing that the forecast shows that they're working on right now.
Right. Solve a problem. And one way to learn about some of the problems is just by reading the news, even paying attention to congressional testimony. A lot of times leaders of organization will go talk in front of Congress, and you can gather where their pain points are, things like that.
And many government employees, they publish a lot, they speak, their leaders testify. And so once you have done some basic research into who your players are at all the layers, who the program managers are, who the cabinet officials are, those people are publishing, they're speaking. You can look for their presence online and see what kinds of things they're talking about. You can also take a look, and every single agency has a strategic plan. And that spans multiple years. That has not only the priorities, but also the language that your buyers use to talk about what they're doing. So your ability to speak to your buyer in literally their language is very different from saying, hello, I'm a service disabled, veteran-owned, woman-owned 8A business in a hub zone. You got something for me? How
Right.
often did somebody say that to you, Emily?
A lot. And even if you don't
Really?
say, have you got something for me? The fact that you started with all those categories makes me think that that's what you want. Just have you got something for me? So
Got it.
yes, definitely. And within the Department of the Navy, I know that each of the buying commands has a small business strategy that's published on their forward-facing website. So there's a lot of information that you can get from websites by doing your homework. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so talk about the whole principle of small is beautiful. Then one of the things that you said that people do that really does not help them is chasing after big, huge, giant contracts, especially in the last 10 weeks of the fiscal year.
Well, just think about it. If you don't have any past performance and you don't have a lot of experience within the government, the best way is to start out small and get good past performance. Get smaller contracts that you know you can deliver on, get practice that way, even maybe as a subcontractor, and get a good solid foundation. And because the government employees are typically risk adverse, right? I mean, the kinds of things that the government's buying to accomplish their mission need to work. They need to be delivered on time. So show that you can deliver on time, that you can deliver a quality product, not just by saying that, but by having past performance on smaller dollar value efforts that demonstrate that. And then if you're persistent and you get a lot of smaller actions, then you can kind of slowly build up to the bigger ones. But don't set yourself up for failure on $1 million contracts if you haven't had any smaller contracts. You don't know how the government pays their bills, how payment's going to work. You're not familiar with a lot of the contract clauses. Start out slow, and that can help you build faster.
Sure. One of my favorite success stories is with my friend Jennifer Rhodes, Vice President of Business Development at Tagents. And she had a contract for document management at Washington Headquarters Service, the Pentagon. It's about a $10,000 contract. They delivered it well, but they then asked the question, hey, do you know anybody else that's got a requirement, something like this? And they had inklings of something that might have involved a requirement to comply with the National Records Administration regulation. And in a matter of 6 weeks, by following up and having conversations, they ended up with $1 million contract award in 6 weeks. Yeah. And so being able to start small and prove that you're a good, solid, low-risk performer raises somebody's comfort level to line you up for something a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger than that.
Oh, I definitely agree. And a lot of times, if you're doing specific work like what she was doing for a particular customer, that customer a lot of times knows other organizations that might have similar work, just like you said. So going back to your customer, once you've done a good job, not once you've gotten the contract award, but once you've delivered on that contract and demonstrated that you can get it done, that's when I'd go back and talk about more work. That's good.
Yeah. Start small and be persistent. This is a long game. Often I'll ask people, what's your goal for fiscal year end? They say, I want to win 2 or 3 multi-million-dollar awards. And if you haven't won anything that big with that agency before, writing what I call novels for strangers, just pumping out proposals, is a really expensive way to get my name out there. You have a finite amount of resources, especially resources and time and talent of your technical team who's writing proposals. And rather than decimating their morale, they're doing their best and somehow they're just not winning. This is a good way to lose some of your most talented people. If you are able to repurpose some of the time and effort and resources on your team into having smaller conversations, then the amount of intelligence you pick up and you can feed your proposal team is also a whole lot more and positions you for much bigger wins later on.
And I would also say if you don't get the award, or even if you do get the award, ask for a debriefing. Now, sometimes you're not going to get a debriefing on smaller awards.
Mhm.
It just depends on what the contracting officer is willing to do. But understanding why you won and understanding why you didn't win informs you for the next go around.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that the smartest people do is they ask for a debriefing even when they win. Because
Yes.
if you won on a technicality and everybody's secretly holding their nose until you can get out of the first base year and they can cancel your contract and not go into option years, you don't want to know that. You don't want that to be a surprise. If it turns out you have a lot to prove, then you want to know where you were weak
Right.
as well if you just won by a tiny little margin.
Yeah, just because you won doesn't mean you don't have any weaknesses, and that the customer is kind of a little concerned about, even though you won. So you're exactly right. Go in there and talk with your customer.
How did that make you feel when somebody won a contract and said, debrief us, how can we do better? How did you feel about them when they did that?
That's impressive. That's really impressive. And it's impressive even when they didn't win and they ask for a debriefing, because sometimes they just don't follow up. And that's important too. It makes you think, well, maybe they just didn't really care. So and they don't care to improve. So it's good to get it either way.
So when somebody's not successful and they come back for a debrief, that makes a positive impression on you as a contracting officer, because it shows that they are still serious about staying in the game, about serving you, about building relationship.
Yeah, especially if it's not like, we want to debrief because we're going to go and protest. You know, if it's, sometimes the contracting officer can be a little bit on guard because, you're challenging. So it depends on how you come across. If you're coming across to just get information so that you can protest, or are you coming across to get information so you can do better next time?
So stating your intention right up front, and your honest intention right up front makes a big difference for how much you're going to learn and how much candor, and maybe even who shows up in the meeting.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
How interesting.
Typically, if you bring your lawyer, the government's going to have a lawyer in the meeting.
Probably more than one, yeah. Stories for another day.
Yes.
So there are three things, if we had to recap, three things to remember at fiscal year end. And so one of them was make communications personal. You're writing to a person. There's no such thing as winning business from the government.
Right.
There's another real human being that has their signature, physically or electronically, next to yours. Second, focus on what they need, not what you need. Lots of us wake up in the morning going, I really need another dollar coming through the door. And that's real nice, but that's not your buyer's problem.
Right.
And finally, small is beautiful, small is powerful. Start small, be persistent. So when we were brainstorming this, putting this together, I loved what we came up with. There are 8 things you need to do when you want them to return your call. So let's go through these, because getting our calls returned. I've talked to hundreds of business owners, and they say that getting in front of the right federal buyer is their single biggest challenge. And failure to solve that problem will cost you anywhere from $1 million to $10 million this year. So let's set them up and knock them down. Okay. If you want your call returned, talk about these things.
Well, be specific. Call a specific person with a specific question about a specific opportunity. It's kind of like the same thing with the email. You're reaching out to a person and you've got specific questions. You're showing that you've done your homework by those specific questions. And you're talking about a specific opportunity. And I think that's all important, because if you're just kind of calling and saying, do you guys buy, and you list something, then that tells me you haven't even done your homework. You haven't gone into the databases to figure out what the organization buys. You haven't done your homework, and you're relying on, you haven't even looked at the website. I could tell when people called and they hadn't even looked at the website. Really? We had to talk them through how to even get to the website. So they hadn't looked at the website of the organization that they were calling.
I will always remember this. I felt really special. Someone from the Environmental Protection Agency and invited me to their small business outreach event. Well, I felt so special. I thought, well, I don't really want to do business with EPA, but I'll just kind of sit in the back. And so I still remember Jeanette Brown stood up at the front of the room. She said, who here can tell me what we do? And I went, oh no, I was so embarrassed. I thought I shown up at this thing. I didn't read the website. I'm just sitting in the back, but I'm trying to make myself real small. She said, air, water, dirt. I went, how hard was that? I could have looked it up. So it's just under every single one of those agencies has their mission, let alone their strategic plan, their stuff on their website. One of my buddies, career federal sales professional, Raquel Steffes, would say sometimes she would find a past contract award and put the contract number in the email subject line and have something to ask about it, even though it was a past thing and it was actually almost the lure on the fishing trip. But she knew all about that thing and it was a springboard for conversation.
Right.
So it wasn't just dumping a random number on the thing, but she had a particular reason why that was a springboard for conversation.
Yeah, that's good. Be polite is another one. Not everyone.
How would somebody be impolite? Tell me what that even sounds like. I'm confused.
Just getting confrontational, just, saying, well, why aren't you going to help me? Or, there are people like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why, when, in what universe does that ever work?
It doesn't. It doesn't work.
On the other hand, it must be it's really challenging from a vendor's point of view to you go all the way from October 1st all the way to July with minimal revenue, and you're spending all your time trying to have conversations and get your calls returned. It sure is hard to stay cheerful and chipper.
It is. So you just got to keep that. You've got to just keep that down and understand that maybe the person that you're talking to right now, this is the first time you've talked to that person. They don't understand all of the stuff that's making you stressed out right now. And they weren't part of that, possibly. So you've just got to try to take a deep breath and not let your frustration come through on the phone.
And it's possible that things have been stressing them out too, and you have no idea.
Definitely possible. And, you might be calling because you might say, well, I've sent you 3 emails and no one's responded. Well, maybe the emails were sent to the wrong email address. Maybe they went to junk mail. So we all have stories we tell ourselves about other people, and just kind of check those at the door and assume the best.
Right. So where's the fine line between pestilence and persistence? How much phone, email, how much follow-up is too much? How do you get past the discomfort of, well, I've called them twice now. Should I call them again? How do you navigate that space of just being uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's hard.
In following up.
It's hard, but also understand that, like sometimes I didn't return emails just because I was on travel all the time and I got so many emails and it fell by the wayside and got buried. So just try to understand that for the most part, government employees are not ignoring you on purpose. They just have a lot going on just like you do. And you're not the only contractor that they're dealing with, just like they're probably not the only organization that you're dealing with. And so just be polite, but be persistent. So sometimes you might say, would you mind if I follow up with you? Like if you've had a call with somebody and they say, I'm going to get back to you, I think it's okay to say, could you give me an expectation of when? Is it going to be tomorrow? Do you think it'll take about a week? When should I follow up with you again? And I think that how people react to that just depends on the person. Like that wouldn't bother me. So it's just kind of getting to know the people that you're working with. Sometimes I would even say, if you don't hear back from me in a week, follow up with me again. And that took some pressure off of me to try to remember everything that I was supposed to do. And then I wouldn't mind that they called again. So, but if you're calling like every day, being unrealistic about your expectation of how quick they should get back to you, then that's kind of a problem. It's hard too when you're on the phone. It's kind of reading body language and sensing.
And it can be really, really feel awkward to be hearing someone say, oh, I'll call you. And I often find that people are receptive when I'll say, well, when would be a good time frame to follow? Say before or after the 4th of July.
Right.
Before or after August 5th. What about the week of August 9th? Is what day of the week works best for you?
Right.
Is morning or afternoon going to work? And get used to asking those questions. It gets people a little bit comfortable. Most people don't try to squirm out of that conversation. They understand that you've called for a reason, and if they're still on the line, then they have a reason to want to put something on the calendar. I will also say that you also have to have realistic expectations. I would say about 35% of the finally negotiated, all right, then it's going to be August 8th at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, which is going to be, it's Mountain Time and it's the summertime and it's Arizona, so that's going to be 2 and 3 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and I write it all down and I look forward to that call, and it doesn't happen. So
Right.
and that real life is happening to folks. So you've also got one of the other things then when you call and you don't reach somebody, you leave the chipper voicemail and say, I hope everything's okay. I'll call you back on Thursday at 2, your time. And you call them back Thursday at 2, their time. And you fully expected to get a voicemail, and you leave another chipper voicemail and say, it's Judy again. Hope everything's okay. Check your email. I found an article that might interest you. I look forward to following up. So you've got the email voicemail 2-step right now is apparently getting some good results. After you go a number of rounds, sometimes you just got to back off for a couple of weeks and come back, because as you said, you can't know when somebody got sent on travel, or these days when something just happened.
Right.
We're
And
in times where things are happening to people.
that's right. And I think too, that you can always reach out to the small business professional of that organization too, and say, hey, I've tried calling Sally, 3 or 4 times, and this is what's happened. Can you just double check, make sure, and sometimes a small business professional can look into it for you too.
See whether they got moved or they got transferred,
Right,
or something else, or just the telecom infrastructure just imploded in that office. Sometimes even that happens.
You never know. We tell ourselves a story, but sometimes it's not the story we tell ourselves isn't the reason.
Yeah. So one of the piece of advice that you gave was get to the point. What's an example of a good ask and a wandering, confusing question?
A good ask is, my name is so-and-so. I'm giving you a call. My company, I noticed on your website that you have a challenge that you're trying to solve, or part of your mission is this, and my company does this, and I'd like to see if I could come in and talk with you about the services our company provides, something like that. When you're not getting to the point, it's kind of like starting with your socioeconomic status or going into a lot of detail about what your company does, and really technical detail that maybe a contracting officer doesn't necessarily need to know. It might need to be a technical person needs to understand that. So you got to kind of just cut to the chase quickly. And and the people watching this know that people have a short attention span. So you got to get to them quickly, making them know that you can solve their need, or you just have a quick question that you need an answer to.
How good a strategy is it, or tactic, if you're trying to get to know somebody, to ask them to take 5 minutes and give you some feedback on their capability statement, for example? What do you think of that as an opening, a conversation opener?
I think that's good. It depends on who you're talking to. You want to make sure you're giving the information on your capability statement to the right person. And sometimes it's not the contracting officer. Sometimes it's the technical person that has a requirement. So making sure, if you want to talk about your capability statement, ask them if they're the right person to talk about that with, I think is important. And then if they're not, ask them if they can get you in front of the right person to talk about your capability statement.
That's brilliant, because I think if you've done your best to try to find the program, the end user, the data will show you who somebody is in the contracting shop. And if it's clear in the contracting shop that you're trying your best to get feedback, you want to get out of the hair of the person in contracting. You said, I found out these kinds of things. If you were me, what direction would you head, or what office would you be talking to? Because I want to be able to make this better.
Right. And it really helps sometimes too, because contracting officers don't have a technical background. They might have a business background. So if you're getting into the specifics about, the mixture of chemicals in your product or something like that, that, really doesn't matter to the contracting officer. Their eyes probably just roll in the back of their head. So you've got to know who you're talking to and what information they need to hear. And and then if you know that you're selling something that would be good to talk to somebody in engineering or somebody in logistics, or you want to talk to somebody in the business section of the organization, if you have done your homework and kind of know that, at least that's helpful to a contracting officer or the small business professional as well, when you're trying to dig down and really get with the right technical person that you should meet with.
Great.
Mm-hmm. And then don't go into details with admin people. I had an executive assistant. He was a YN1, and people would call to set up a meeting with me, but they would start going down, explaining their company data sheet or, their capability statement, and explaining the kind of small business they are. And my admin person didn't know that. He was there to schedule meetings, to help me with scheduling calls, to help me with doing my PowerPoint slides. He wasn't an expert on contracting. He wasn't an expert on the small business size status. And so sometimes people call and spend a lot of time explaining details like that to the administrative person. And sometimes the administrative person is a little hesitant to say stop. So they just listen, and it's wasting everybody's time.
Oh, no. Got it. So often federal employees will tell vendors, do your homework. What does that mean? Would you get specific for us?
Well, knowing the types of supplies and services that your target organization typically buys at year end or, during the year, and then how they buy. And we've talked about some of that. And the way that you can find that out is through, you said beta.sam, right? They've changed it. Yeah, beta.sam. There's a lot of information you can find there. Looking at the internet. Like I said, a lot of times people would call me before they'd even gone on the website. And they hadn't done their homework. So that's part of doing your homework, looking at strategic plans on the website, going to networking events, learning as much as you can about the organization. And you've got to really pick which organizations you're going to go after. You can't go after Army, Navy, Air Force, and everybody, especially if you're a brand new small business. You've got to really hone in and get good on maybe one customer, maybe two. But if you're trying to go after everybody, I think you said it right, Judy. You're saying, like, if you're going to go diving for fish or to look at fish, you wouldn't just dive in the whole ocean. You would have a specific kind of fish or a specific area of the ocean, a specific.
You have a dive plan.
Yeah, you have a dive plan. So what is your dive plan? It can't just be, I'm going to go after everybody in the government, because that's just too much.
You run out of air. Literally, you run out of resources. You can't dive the whole ocean. You got 45 minutes or an hour worth of air. That's what you got. And
I understand that you want to get everywhere, but starting small ends up helping you grow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that when you're talking about doing your homework, one of the things that people overlook is the value of talking to your existing contacts, even somebody that you submitted a proposal to unsuccessfully. Don't be embarrassed about that, especially if you never got a debrief in the first place and you're just sort of all cowering going, oh, this person, oh, and I lost that one. If you never even talked to them again, you don't know whether, in fact, you made a great impression and they wondered what happened to you.
Right.
Start. And if you haven't talked to them in a while, well, they haven't talked to you in a while either. So don't get embarrassed. Get brave.
Yeah.
But as well, get brave a long time before September 15th. This is a great time to go get organized, especially if you have some extra resources, a young person with keyboard skills that you can make the effort and collect up all those scraps of paper and the stickies and the dog-eared business cards, get them into a spreadsheet, organize them. Methodically call them back, say checking in, updating our database, here's how we met, and have an idea of a question to ask them. But for sure, especially if they know you, to say, here's what we're doing, here's what we know about your organization, here's the three things, there are the three people or three projects that we were looking at. If you were me, where would you start?
Right.
That at least is a better informed thing than, hi, it's us. Who buys what we do? This is hopeless.
Right. And then you have on here, respond to sources sought and requests for information. That's really important too. A lot of times companies overlook that. They just think, oh, I don't have time. And I know it's frustrating because I know that the government sends out, certain organizations send out a lot of sources sought requests or requests for information, but they do read the responses and they do use them to help determine the contracting strategy, if they're going to do it as a small business set aside or a women owned or a hub zone, or if they're going to make something full and open. They can also use it if they have a pretty big requirement and, with 10 different items in the statement of work and you can only do 2 and 3. If a lot of companies come in and it looks like, well, we could break this into 2 requirements and have, sections 2 and 3 being a small business set aside and the rest be full and open. So the responses to those sources sought do help drive the acquisition strategy.
Wonderful. Yeah, if you are frustrated, and a lot of companies tell me this, that, gee, we never see any notices for things that we do, and you haven't been responding to requests for information or sources sought. That's like getting annoyed about who got elected when you didn't bother to vote.
Yeah.
About which, enough said. But for sure, talk to your existing customers. I go back to the 12X rule. Somebody who's already purchased from you is 12 times more likely to buy from you again than someone who has never heard of you. And so go back to people who have done business with you before. Have those conversations because they like you. They don't wake up in the morning going, I must award another contract to Cheryl. But if Cheryl calls, oh yeah, Cheryl, I've been meaning to talk to you. But if Cheryl doesn't call, that conversation never happens.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind. Yeah.
All right. So I love this question. I remember being at a briefing and one of the attendees said, can you tell me where the low-hanging fruit is? And I just looked at him and said, there's no such thing as low-hanging fruit. Well, there might be a little. So what are the kinds of things that government employees tend to buy more easily? Those last minute purchases, what are those year-end buys?
They're usually the things that they really want, but it's kind of something that they haven't been able to get to, like training is something that, sometimes budgets are tight and can't get to training, but if we get some end of the fiscal year money, we're going to buy some training. Training is one. Maybe getting a study done is another. Assessments or reports. A lot of times supplies, office supplies are things that are bought at the end of the fiscal year and what you've got on this list, spare parts. So, and you can look at that beta.sam.gov data and figure out, well, last 3 end of fiscal years, what are the kinds of things that my target organization bought? What were the contracts and awarded for? And
yeah, you can sort that stuff by date. That's exactly right. And especially if you are right now, you're listening to this recording, you're not hard up against the last few weeks of the fiscal year. It can be a great time to, if you haven't gone more deeply into or learned how to master tapping the free federal contract data on beta.sam.gov contract data, then take some time. There are new tools that the General Services Administration has published on how to go and create the detailed reports. That day of your time you invest in learning how to do that will return to you many, many times over. So take a look and see how the data shows that your buyers behave at your end.
Yeah.
It's all right. Set-asides. When do they matter? You and I are both passionate about not leading with your set-asides, but that being said, when do you talk about certifications? When are they genuinely helpful?
I think they're helpful once the organization has indicated that they do have a need for what you're selling. And that's when you can tell them, well, I am an 8A or I am a hub zone company, and I know another hub zone company that could also do this work, and maybe you could set it aside. So like you have on this chart, when your company can deliver what's needed. And when 2 or more small businesses with that certification can help you get a set aside. So that's why it's good to know who are the other small businesses in your arena that could provide that, satisfy that requirement as well. Or like you said, if your company is the only company that can satisfy that requirement, then maybe there could be a sole source justification.
But you don't want to go there, and certainly don't want to suggest doing that. Because contracting officers are under such pressure to award competitively,
Right.
the ability to create a limited, qualified pool of competitors where you're also going to compete strongly, that
Right.
is a far easier way to go than what you might think is, oh, you'll just sole source it to me, which is a mountain of work and risk.
Yeah, it kind of comes across as a little self-serving if you're just saying, let's do this sole source. Let the contracting officer decide if sole source is the right way to go.
Got it. So what are some of the ways that somebody can drive more business by September 30th? How fast can you go from 0 to 60?
Well, if you've done your homework, you know that what you sell can solve a customer's problem. That's what they're looking for. They're looking to solve their problems, to get their requirements met. So if you're approaching them with solutions to their problems, that is a big help. And I like what you have here, having bite-sized offers ready. Sometimes the organization, on their list, on their wish list might be something that's, let's say $100,000, but they only got 20,000. So what can they buy with 20,000? So having smaller bite-sized offers available and thought through and know what your pricing is and what the end deliverable would be is really good. Like we've discussed, make it easy for the organization to get to you. Know how they buy. Make sure you're on those contracting vehicles if they use some of those like Oasis or something like that. Know what vehicles they use.
And have a partner. If it turns out that it's clear that they use Oasis or they use Seaport Next Gen and you're not on that vehicle, then you don't want to be scrambling around the 3 weeks to go at the end of the fiscal year. Do your research early, vet some partners, make some friends, take a hard look at your pricing and make sure you've got some margin to give away to a partner who's going to, in essence, open up their bridge that's already in place between buyer and seller. But be ready for that.
Yes.
And one of the other trainings that we have is on micro purchase, sole source, superpower. And so I use the word sole source loosely. Micro purchase offers a tremendous amount of flexibility. Look in Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 13. Understand what the rules of engagement are that govern how your buyer can buy. And then come ready to say, explain to me, how do things work in your office? But have that easy conversation with lots of lead time so they appreciate that you want to help them follow the rules, make it easy, make them look good.
Yes.
So a lot of the things we're talking about are things people should be doing at all times of the year.
Right.
So what are some of these things that you can do to just position yourself early? And that can start as early as October 1st, but all year long, what are the kinds of things people should be doing to make it easy and become top of mind?
Well, we've already talked about the importance of responding to sources sought and requests for information, because even if you respond to a sources sought or an RFI and you don't end up getting the contract award, it's part of their market research. So now they know a little bit more about your company than they did before if you've never responded to one before. Attending industry days is important. And now with them being online, that can be helpful. In-person industry days are helpful too, because then you can do a better job of networking with all of the attendees instead of just listening when they're online. But those are good to do. Networking all the time. I mean, I think we know you shouldn't wait until you need contact to develop that relationship. You should have that relationship developed up front and early. And introducing your company's capability to small business folks, that's good for them to know too, because the small business professionals get involved in the acquisition strategy early. And so maybe the contracting officer doesn't know about your company, but if the small business professional does, that helps as well. They're part of the acquisition team and doing that market research. And then exactly performing successfully. A lot of people are like, yes, I got the contract. Let me go try to get another one. You better pay attention to performing successfully on the contracts that you have, or else you're not going to get another one.
Got it.
So,
Exactly
yeah.
right. Emily, thank you so much. I encourage everyone who's watching this to get to know the other facets of how Emily serves in the world. In addition to as a former acquisition professional, she is now in her second year of having extraordinary conversations with people who have overcome difficulties and learn from them and share from them in the Onward podcast. And part of her as leader of now the Onward movement, she's bringing together over 10,000 people is her goal, to bring together people who are supporting each other in moving through difficulty, learning from it, and being here for each other. And so I thank you so much for all the wonderful things you're putting out into the world, and encourage everybody to, you can reach Emily at emilyharman.com. And her contact information is also on social media. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us for this today.
Thank you, Judy. I enjoyed it.
So the view from the buyer's desk is, we were talking about what was going on in Q4, and we covered a lot. We talked about trends and factors in fiscal year end. You now have some idea of what's happening for contracting officers. 3 big mistakes, what to do instead, getting to return your call, what people buy at fiscal year end, when to talk about certifications, and how to drive more business at fiscal year end. Your resources right now include your action guide. So I encourage you to figure out what's your tactic for the week that you're in right now, and go deep. Really dig in with that tactic. Your week 4 calls and connection resources include these templates: 6 simple slides, an introductory capability briefing template. So you can do a briefing in literally 600 seconds, 10 minutes. It's a really powerful template for you to get organized and leave lots of time for dialogue. There's a long form capability template as well for when you have the meeting you really want to have at the beginning and you're not going to get right away with the technical personnel. We have a 50 idea fiscal year end brainstormer for you when you're looking for ideas to just sort of break out of a rut or think, what else could we do to get through? Your graduation bonus this week also includes a live training that I'll be delivering on how to do a hot wash, a year-end mop-up, lessons learned, and get you all set for the fiscal year that's about to begin. And when you write up your own mission accomplished story, what it is that happened for you in Q4, you're also going to get the Federal Communications Planner system, something that will give you the foundation for 12 months of great, solid, valuable communication with the players at all the layers. So your next wins, join us in the Facebook group. Let us know your choice of your week 4 tactic. On Wednesday, post one federal human you plan to call this week and what you'll talk to them about. And Friday, we'll be posting our Grand Slam aha. What's the biggest thing that you found valuable through the Q4 Slam? So Emily, thank you for being with us through all of this. Week by week, here's where we've all been. And you're so strongly positioned now for federal fourth quarter.